Today's date is February the 23rd, 1994. I'm Blake Haley, and we're pleased to have with us Mr. Mac Williams, who is a newspaperman here in Fort Worth and serves on the President's Advisory Board here at the Health Science Center. We're making this video in the Biomed Communications Department of the Gibson D. Lewis Library at the University of North Texas Health Science Center at Fort Worth. And now, having gone through that introduction, Mr. Williams, thank you for taking time out to be with us today for a few minutes. If you could, give us your prior background, a little personal experience of when you were in the newspaper business and leading us up to today.
Well, I'll be glad to, Blake, and I'm happy to be here with you. I've been a newspaperman for over 60 years, and I'm 75, so you can see it's been a big part of my life.
Oh, yeah.
I worked on several newspapers in the East, and but then I was a Washington correspondent, White House correspondent when President Franklin D. Roosevelt was serving his second term.
Oh, my.
And when World War II broke out, I went into the Army and was a combat correspondent in the South Pacific. Combat correspondents were Army people. They were enlistees and officers, but their duty was to cover the war.
Mm-hmm.
I came here, well, I was in an Army hospital for a year after the war ended, and I got sort of interested in medicine, you know, just being in that atmosphere and being a patient all that time. And one of my Army friends was Loren McMullen, now dead. Loren was managing editor of the Star-Telegram, and when I got out of the Army, he persuaded me to come down here and work for the Star-Telegram. And I told him, Mac, I've got some other ideas, but I'll come down, and if you really need people badly, well, I worked for 6 months, and they did need people badly after that war. And I came down here, and they hired me to cover the county courthouse, which means crime and politics, that sort of thing. And when I got here, I met Madeline Crimmins, who covered City Hall for the Star-Telegram. And in 6 months, instead of leaving, we were married. I've been here ever since. And my interest in the osteopathic profession is due to Madeline. She and my wife and Dr. Catherine Kenny Carlton, who is very active osteopath here, as you know, they have been close friends since the 2nd grade.
Oh, my.
So you might say she grew up in the osteopathic circles, and so did I after we married. And I found that many of Catherine's friends became our friends, like George Louisville. George had married Louisville, and
one of the founders of
yes,
PCO.
Carl Everett. The three of them were, yeah, and Danny Byer. Yeah, Danny's dead, I believe. Yeah.
Yes.
And yes, we were good friends all through this period. And in fact, I had dinner with George and Mary Louisville last night. And so we see a lot of them. And Carl Everett invited me to be a member of the TCOM, as it was called then, the TCOM the TCOM Fund, TCOM Fund, an advisory group. Our main goal is to think of ways to get money, bring money in, and we do it with some success, some failures, but that's what we do. And so I got to know something about osteopathy, and that impressed me. One thing impressed me was osteopaths frequently were out in the country where they were needed, you know, out in the rural areas. And I thought that was good instead of being a lot of specialists in big cities. So that impressed me. And I worked, I've worked on most of the newspapers in this area.
I was going to ask you, you've worked on quite a few, and I think you even owned one at one time?
Yes, I owned the Fort Worth News Tribune from 1971 to 1986. My wife and I, I might add, we work together in most of these things we do, and so she's kind of my partner too.
Oh,
And we did. And I worked for the Dallas Times-Herald and the Fort Worth Press and the Denton Record Chronicle and United Press and a couple of others like that. But I did go to work for the Star-Telegram here when I came here in 1947. And as you undoubtedly know, Amon Carter Sr. was still very much alive and very active and a very powerful man in this community and in this state. And Amon, who was aging then, his personal physician was Dr. Phil Russell, who's osteopathic leader in the community. And so Phil also was the personal physician of Sid Richardson, who at that time was billed as the richest bachelor in the United States. He was, too. But Sid Richardson was the patriarch of the Bass family. Perry Bass is Sid Richardson's nephew. And so that's where the money started from. Sid Richardson was a poor guy who hit it rich in oil, very, very rich. And anyway, Phil and, Sid and Amon were patients of Dr. Phil Russell. And both of them thought highly of him, credited him with keeping them in good shape for a long time. But in the reader of the Star-Telegram, if they did have a story about an osteopath, would figure these osteopaths are something on a par with chiropractors.
which is not what they wanted to hear.
You see, the publishers don't write newspapers. They're publishers. But the newspapers are written by usually much younger people, reporters and editors and that sort of thing. And they just grew up not knowing any better. Very few of them knew much about osteopaths. And so it was, so help me, it was not very often when I came here in the 40s, after World War II, it was rare to find an osteopath's name prefixed by doctor. They wouldn't say Dr. Dan Beyer. They'd say Dan Beyer, a Fort Worth osteopath.
Oh.
Yes, that's right. And so right from the start, with my osteopathic friends and the high regard I held them in, I tried to do something about it. I began writing stories, on my run, whenever I could, referring to osteopaths as doctor, so-and-so and so-and-so, and osteopathy as medicine, and the osteopathic school, when it came along, as a medical school. And I think Madeline and I were the first ones in Fort Worth to insist on that kind of description. And it took a long time to catch on. I'm not sure it's caught on entirely yet, but we did break the ice on that. And we couldn't feel otherwise. Catherine, her parents, for whom we knew and liked very much, were osteopaths. Her husband was an osteopath. She's a widow now. And so these were people we knew, and we knew that they deserved the dignity and respect that MDs do. And I might point out, Blake, that in those days, I don't know if it's still true, but MDs were very actively opposed to osteopaths. I mean, they used their political pull and whatever else they could do to put osteopaths on a lower level. And I would tell many people, and write stories too, that osteopaths have to pass the same medical exams as the MDs, so what's the difference? And the osteopath, in addition, is a treater of the whole person, rather than just your finger when your finger hurts. So that's how we kind of got into it. And then I think we were able to get the osteopathy. We were able to get osteopathy some good press. And I know we suggested, and they did it after a while, the Tarrant County Association had 3 or 4 press parties just so they could get to know the reporters. And
You're probably one of the big people there since you had the best inside.
I was able to be of some help, yeah. Tell them who to invite and who not to invite. Titles don't mean much on a newspaper, they really don't. The people who get the paper out might not have any title at all. So that's how it started with us, and I remember now that when I owned the Fort Worth News Tribune, which was a semi-weekly. We came out twice a week.
And this was about what period of time?
This was 1947 to 1971 to 1986.
Okay, all right.
1986. Now there I had complete control. I owned it and was publisher of the paper and editor of the paper, and my wife was managing editor. We had absolute control. So it's probably the only Fort Worth newspaper in all time that had big front page headlines about medical school to expand here. And the Star Telegram would say osteopathics to do so and so and so, osteopaths to do so and so. We identified osteopathy with medicine strongly, and while it doesn't sound like such a much today, it was big stuff in those days. We're talking about 40, 30 years ago.
The MDs probably weren't too impressed with that idea either.
Oh yeah, you bet. And of course Ray Stokes, who was first employee here, Ray worked for the Fort Worth Press, and so he and I, became friends quickly, and his job was sort of a public relations, fundraising job. And so with Ray, it was like some of these other people, like the Louisvilles and the Byers and the Everetts. We were personal friends as well as everything else. And I remember very well when the first hospital was opened in Roy Fisher's home on Summit and Lancaster.
This is what is now the Osteopathic Medical Center of Texas? Is that
well, this was long before that.
Oh, okay.
Long before that. This was right after the war, at World War II. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only war. And no, this was right after the war. And Roy and his brother Ray lived on the first floor of this two-story frame house at Summit and Lancaster. And the second floor was a hospital. They had a little hospital. That's how it started. And then after that, it started growing a little bit. That was a two-bed hospital, And I'm sorry, the hospital was on the ground floor, and Roy and Ray lived upstairs on the second floor. And then they grew a little bit, and they moved over to Camp Bowie and took over Jack Tavender's bowling alley. They're in a bowling alley up there.
Bowling alleys are quite popular for the osteopathic profession here.
That's right. And that was at Camp Bowie and Dorothy Lane, not too far from the present building. And so all in all, we have been on the fringes, you might say, of this profession for a long time.
How was the view, as far as the medical school kind of sprung up around 1970, what was the community's standpoint as far as the osteopathic profession bringing a medical school into Fort Worth?
Well, it hardly caused a ripple. It hardly caused a ripple. People, we had these big hospitals here. We had All Saints. We had, but these were staffed almost entirely with MDs. And I think George Louisville became the first DO to be on the staff at the community hospital, Peter Smith. And it didn't cause much excitement. As the school and the hospital grew, well, people became more aware of it, but just bringing it here, it didn't amount to much at the time.
At the time, so so I assume then later, then there were some problems.
Oh, well, now it's one of our major industries, and it brings a lot of prestige to the community and a lot of publicity to the community. And the Star Telegram, they cover it pretty well, I think, certainly very well compared to what it used to be. But the Star Telegram, also when Amon Carter was alive, Amon owned the Star Telegram, and he was the patient. He was an osteopathic patient. Today, the Star Telegram is owned in New York, and has been since 1975. So you don't have that personal touch anymore. And I don't think they cover much about osteopaths anymore. I don't see much.
Do you think there could be more that they could do in that regard?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I certainly do. Yeah, I certainly do.
Do you think that now, of course, we've become a part of the UNT system, and the name change and the idea of bringing in some more schools and so forth. How do you think that's going to play, and do you think being affiliated with UNT helps it a lot more, or is it going to, does that really have any effect at all in this city?
It has great effect, great favorable effect. Gib Lewis and Betty Ann Duhar are good friends of mine. I see them all the time. Now, Betty was the first woman senator in the Texas Senate, and she carried the ball. Her husband is an MD, but she carried the ball for the osteopathic school and hospital in Austin, and a very dedicated woman. She's sold on this profession. And Gib, of course, as Speaker of the House, was able to do tremendous work for the school. And this building here will be the last building of its kind. The state will never again build an educational building with the facilities and the appearance and the comforts that this one has. Gib largely made it possible. So he ran the legislature, and he really did.
You've known him then for a number of years. Did you cover him when he was in the...
Gib? Oh, yeah. I covered Gib here. Before he became Speaker, he was a state representative from River Oaks neighborhood here in town. And yeah, I covered Gib and a lot of other guys who had a hand in helping the osteopathic school and the hospital get some favorable legislation.
I know there probably were some tough times in the legislature. Are you aware of any problems that he might have had or that you had to cover? Or was it pretty much smooth sailing for most of these transformations that the Health Science Center's gone through?
Yeah, you had two ever-present problems. First, you had the MDs, who didn't want to see the osteopaths get anything. And then you had legislators from other parts of the state who couldn't understand why there shouldn't be an osteopathic college and hospital in their district.
I know.
So every time, this came up, well, I'm not going to vote unless you build a hospital in Laredo.
I know that there was a problem. A lot of people felt like that South Texas should have a medical school.
Yes.
And San Antonio was actually one place that wanted a new one.
That's correct.
How do you think all that came about as far as getting it here and not worrying about San Antonio?
I think it was very effective selling and campaigning and politicking. The osteopaths here in Fort Worth, you probably know them as well or better than I do, they're a good bunch. I mean, they get out and work, and they use every bit of their influence to get things not for themselves personally, but for the profession, the school and the college. And you could give them nearly all the credit for this happening. And and then we've had a good representative in Austin, Dan Jensen, who's a darn good man. He's in Austin a good bit of the time. And then we had Tex Minor, no, that's, well, I forget, but anyway, Tex was there for a long time too. And it's very important to have effective lobbyists down there.
Sounds like then we have good people in our
Yes,
ranks.
You do, you do.
You serve on the President's Advisory Board, and you also mentioned that you helped raise funds and so forth for the school.
Yeah, I was supposed to.
What are some of the things over the years that you've been involved in that respect? And what are some of the
Well, I've
duties?
been on this board about 3 years, I believe. And we've, not through none of my doing, but Ray Stokes is connected to that group, and Ray tries to keep in constant touch with the alumni. So tries to get the alumni to contribute to this school where they did so well as students. And so that's been a big part of our stuff. And then we tried to get people to mention the school in their wills. And one thing I've pushed for, it hadn't happened yet, but I'm pushing for it. I think patients who were treated successfully by osteopaths would be easy to approach and say, look, you owe a debt to an osteopath, and we're trying to do so and so and so. How about writing a check? And we may get into that sooner. We haven't yet, but I feel like a patient who comes in sick and goes home cured owes something, and so we're going to see what we can do with that.
Where would you like to see the osteopathic profession, or how would you like to see it viewed in Fort Worth in the coming years? And do you have any ideas of what you think that the school ought to do to help its position out a little bit more?
I think the school is fine. I really do. And the school has good reputation, and the hospital does too. But what I would like to see it, just accepted as a branch of medicine, just like the MDs, and no ifs, ands, or buts, and no. They're like MDs except for so and so and so and so. No except for. They're doctors, and they're physicians, and they're doctors of medicine. That's what I would like to see. And I think school and the hospital have very good reputations now here in Fort Worth. And of course this North Texas affiliation makes it even better.
We've covered a number of topics here. I know there's probably some other things you'd like to bring up, and perhaps in relation to the profession or other areas that you've been involved in with it. Anything else that you kind of want to mention?
No, I don't think so. I think this public relations business is a two-way street, and you know, the newspapers and TV and so on, they can do a lot of good or a lot of harm to the osteopathic profession, sometimes without even knowing what they're doing. But at the same time, the profession has to have some good people in touch with newspapers. And you have Bill Hicks, and you had Janet Odom was here for a long time, and I forget the lady up there now. But you've always,
Brown, I think.
yeah, right. But you've always had good people, and that's very important.
So a lot of our, good press comes from the Health Science Center itself, and that's probably what will help us, the good press releases and so forth.
Yeah, keep in touch. By all means, keep in touch with them. Yeah.
What things would you like to do on the advisory committee?
Raise some money.
Just raise money. Do you have any ideas of programs? You mentioned earlier about getting patients to contribute. Do you have any other thoughts as far as?
Well, no, I think this affiliation with North Texas opens all kinds of possibilities, and I think as the connection, becomes a little more mature, we'll think of some ideas.
I know that, I understand that years ago there was a medical school attempted to start in Fort Worth along early part of the century.
Fort Worth University.
We were wondering what, if that ever had any effect on things today, or if anybody ever looked at that not happening as something that could happen with TCOM. Would TCOM come and go like that did? Do you?
No, I don't believe so. I like to write local history, and I wrote one column called In Old Fort Worth every week for 17 years. And I wrote a couple of books in Old Fort Worth, and so I'm interested in what you were saying, and I can tell you, I can give you the answer. Fort Worth University had a law school, and it had a medical school, and it was located on College Avenue on the south side, where Trimble Tech High School is located today. And it turned out some great doctors for that period. We're talking about 1900, 1895, 1905, and they were all MDs, to my knowledge. There might have been a few others, but they're mostly MDs, and they formed the medical reserves of this city. Many of them lived long lives, and just into the 20s and 30s. And doctors had Fort Worth University did have a very good reputation, and the reason it disappeared, we had a law school, and Dallas opened a law school.
Ah.
And so that kind of took the edge off our law school, so that kind of withered. And then the University of Texas began branching out in different parts of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And so the need for a medical college in Fort Worth was diminished. And they finally ended up merging with a medical school in Tulsa or Oklahoma City. I think it was Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the graduates of that school worked here and were highly respected for many years after they graduated.
So when the osteopathic profession came along up in a medical school, it kind of, in a sense, it was a good thing because we didn't have an osteopathic school in Texas, so it helped out in that respect.
Yes, it did.
Whereas Southwest does the MD end of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there any other comments you'd like to bring up or suggestions you'd like to make?
No, except I enjoyed meeting you and everybody else here, and I think it looks to me like you're doing a real good job.
Well, I do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that when I talked to you a few weeks ago, we had to search for a time. I know that even though you're not doing too much in the newspaper business, you're still very busy in the community and so forth. And I do appreciate you taking time out of that schedule to meet with us and help us with this particular oral history. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Blake, and I enjoyed being with you.
And that will wrap this interview up, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.